Fantastic. Hello, everyone who may or may not be watching on the Helium Turtle YouTube channel. Thank you for joining us. And welcome to episode 11 of the Until You Make It podcast. Today, we have joining me Mr. Michael Yavish, as always, Mr. Ryan Lau, as well as special guest Evan Schiff, who, and I didn't even ask you, I hope I'm pronouncing that right.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, fantastic. That's good. So yeah, thanks everyone for joining. Today we have a decent amount to talk about because Mr. Evan Schiff just happens to be most well known for his work as an editor on John Wick 2 and John Wick 3. That's the coolest thing I've ever heard.
Yes.
First off the bat. So congrats to you on that. Both excellent films, but we'll get into all that stuff a little bit later. First of all, just thanks for joining us, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, I guess to start off, we were kind of talking before we even went live about how, everyone at Helium Turtle, our side of things, we all kind of are, small time filmmakers. We do a little bit of everything. We do the editing, we do the audio, we do the choreography. And so where did you kind of start off in this whole space of creative video stuff?
Well, when I was in high school, between my junior and senior year of high school, I started off interning at Stan Winston Studio. And so they're an animatronics studio out here. They did, they created the animatronics for like Terminator and Predator and Aliens. And when I was out there, they were working on Galaxy Quest and End of Days. So those were my first two credits in the industry. And that was mostly just like going on set and doing whatever people needed me to do.
Coffee boy.
More than that, it wasn't quite that. There was joking because in the animatronics world, things have to glisten a lot. So there was some of the mechanics were like, let's send him out to find the biggest bottle of KY that he can find because they smear that on the like silicone
no way, that's something
so that they glisten. But no, I did on Galaxy Quest, I was on set for like a week or two, helping, I had the like control on one of the airbags inside the Thermians. And so, as they were like moving, I was some of the I'd basically push a button and they would make them look like they were breathing, and it would sort of, it would inflate an airbag inside that would make the skin, expand a little bit. And then
I gotta say just quickly, when Mike and I were preparing a little bit, so we looked into your IMDb, and we both saw Galaxy Quest, and we're like, that is so funny because me personally, that's a movie I think nobody's really gives enough credit to for being as good as it is. And
there's a whole documentary on it now I think on Hulu.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, it's great, and talks entirely about that, about how it's this like very when you talk to people who have seen it, it's like, potentially the best Star Trek movie, that's been made. But when it came out, it wasn't as big as, as you would have hoped, but it has definitely a strong, cult following.
Yeah, it's interesting. So anyway, I just found that so funny. Let's continue.
So that was fun. And then I don't remember what I did on the End of Days set. That was just like a few days. They were shooting the end of the movie after the train crashes. And I think the like devil explodes out of one of the actors' chests. Cool. Yeah, so I got started there. I grew up in upstate New York. I didn't realize even though I have family in the industry out here and my parents are originally from out here, I didn't really realize that like working in movies was the thing that you could do until maybe my sophomore year of high school, and then I was like, okay, well, that's what I'm going to do then, obviously. And so I started, pestering my family, and that's how I got the setup at Stan Winston. I applied to USC for film school and, ended up going there for 4 years. And then while I was there, I figured out I wanted to edit more so than do animatronics and creature effects.
Did you always have a love for film when you were younger?
Yeah, like, there's not a lot to do in Syracuse. So like, I spent a lot of time going to the movies by myself, and I kept like trying to get from my friends to be like, hey, let's go see a movie this afternoon. And they'd be like, we just saw one yesterday. And be like, yeah, I know, let's go see another one. And they weren't that into that. So, and they're like, I didn't know anybody that was like making movies in Syracuse. Like a lot of my film school friends are like, oh yeah, we like shot all these movies when we were kids and got the whole like, neighborhood together and a camera. And I didn't really know anybody doing that. So like most my friends and I did a lot of, I did like, was on the stage crew in high school, and, I ran the like sound mixer for our musicals and things like that. But I didn't know anybody making videos. And so, so I went out to SC and realized that I liked editing a little bit better, I think, than the like path for creature effects. But the working at Stan's allowed me to get into editing, in a professional sense while also still finishing college. And so yes, that's what I did. So by the time I graduated from SC, I was on my way into editorial.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's so funny that I didn't even think of there being like a path to the more practical side of things with like the creature effects like you were talking about. So by the time you had, kind of discovered that, oh, I want to be on the, more of the editorial side of things, did all that stuff you did at that studio, like making connections there, help you break into that space more? Or was it like a separate thing?
It's kind of a separate thing. I mean, the biggest thing is that it got me visual effects editing experience, and it got me into the union. And those are two really big, those are big hurdles. So I definitely, when I was applying for jobs that I was probably actually not that qualified for, having the credits as like a visual effects editor for Stan Winston Studio, that helped a lot.
And what exactly? You're saying visual effects editing, what does that entail? Because I kind of know, but I'm not really sure the specifics of it.
So if you're talking about on like the production side, so on like where the editorial department actually is, if you're on a big Marvel movie and you've got 2,000 VFX shots in your movie, it's somebody's job, in this case, the VFX editor's job, to track all of those shots, to do temp composites, that you stick in the edit to work with before you have a shot back from an actual vendor like Industrial Light and Magic or someplace like that. So it's a part creative and part organizational job. You'll see like most VFX editors come armed with their own FileMaker database that they've been tailoring for decades. And so it's part tracking and part compositing.
When you were at USC, what would you say, like, what made you gravitate towards editing over like all the other aspects of filmmaking that you were probably working on in school?
Yeah, I mean, like SC has a production track where you do it's basically centered around 3 production classes. And in the first class, they just give you a bunch of like, just a cheap video camera and say like, come back with a movie every 3 weeks. And so, and there's not like, there are some rules, but it's basically like, just go out and just like get experience and start shooting stuff. But so then in that case, you're writing, you're shooting, you're doing your own sound, you're doing your own editing and whatever else you want to do. And in that class, I realized that I didn't like most of the other jobs, but I did like spending my weekends in the edit lab, cutting my terrible movies together. And that was really the like, and then I would take them into class and people would be like, well, the story sucks, the cinematography is not great, but the editing is actually surprisingly good. And that was, that I sort of took that as like, yeah, that's the part I like too. Maybe I should go pursue that. And then by the time I got into the advanced film production class at SC, that's where you sort of have to choose what position on the crew you want to apply for a senior's project that they're directing. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to focus on editing. Yeah.
So everyone said everything else sucks, but the editing is great.
I'm not terrible at cinematography. I'm not a good writer, and I didn't enjoy writing. And that was really, I think, like in that class in particular. the people that had grown up making movies in their childhood definitely had a leg up over those of us who were like, I'd like to get into movies, but I don't really know what that involves, and then they're like, write something. You're like, I've never written anything like this, in my life. And so, yeah, so the writing was terrible. The stories were terrible. But the point of that class is actually not to make good movies. The point of that class is to make bad movies and bring them into your class and have your peers tear you to pieces. And that builds up your wall. So it was really valuable for that, because by the time you graduate from that class, you're like, I can take criticism and then just let it roll off my back and it's fine.
Right. I mean, actually when you frame it like that, it becomes such an important tool rather than just an experience, to be able to move forward with that. We're all nodding our heads along as you say, terrible writing, because at least Ryan and I say time and time again, we can't write for shit, we can't. Try and leave that to the other people, and then we come in with the big ideas and try and put our spin on it. So that's so funny to hear from someone like you.
That was the biggest struggle of writing short films in college was that part. And yeah, we tried to pull in like our actors who had some improv background and another friend that was an actor, and have them focus on the script writing, because they would be the ones delivering the dialogue, and at least they could like kind of mold the dialogue to fit what their style is. And then we would focus on, everything else that what we were good at, which was the technical side of things like camera editing and VFX. So definitely feel that very deeply.
Yeah. Now like later in my career, I guess not that later in my career, I'm getting into a little bit of writing, but I still don't really enjoy it all that much.
Do you enjoy being on set when you have the opportunity?
I do enjoy being on I like being on set for like a couple hours, when they're shooting someplace fun. I don't like being on set all day if I don't have anything to do, because then you just end up in everybody's way. But like, I just wrapped up, I was working on Bullet Train, and we just finished shooting last week, actually. So that, because of COVID restrictions, I couldn't go on set most of the time, but I made sure there was one really cool set. I was like, I'm going to go on set, and thankfully it was outside, so that made it easier.
Do they ever bring you on the set for like a creative reason, or some kind of like, does it benefit you at all? Or like, did they bring you in to benefit how they're shooting things?
Like, I've never been on a call sheet like except for when I'm cutting on set for a reshoot. Like that's, then in that case, it's like, like on John Wick 2, we had a week of reshoots in Montreal. And so I just, brought my laptop and a hard drive, and a monitor or whatever on set. And I would go wherever they went and set up, next to Video Village. And, then in that case, like I would get downloads from the DIT, every couple of hours and start cutting things together to make sure that, we were getting the things that we were there to reshoot, because we weren't going to have another chance to do it again.
Yeah, we've actually seen that before, that technique of like, or like the idea or strategy, whatever, of editing on set. And we've seen it with Baby Driver, and we've also seen it with the Raid. The Raid 2 did it, just for either it's instant gratification of what you're trying to do, just to make sure things work. I mean, Baby Driver's case was the syncing of the music.
Yeah, actually, I cut all the animatics on Baby Driver. Cool. And then
wait, no way! I didn't see that. That's fantastic.
Yeah,
it's amazing.
Edgar and I. So Paul, the editor who cut the actual movie, started with Edgar in the UK on Baby Driver, years and years ago, and he cut together. I think they did like a table read with some actors, and so he cut that together. And then Edgar has a house here in LA. And he was, doing more development work, so he needed somebody local. And I got set up with him, so he would come over to my apartment, and we worked on like the pitch reel. And we spent like a few months doing a pitch reel that was about 15 minutes, and it had like 120 different movies in it. I ripped all these Blu-rays, downloaded some YouTube clips. Went all out. I wish I could show it, because it's, you can't show these things because they're made of all these other movies, but they're like, it was like. I've done a few of these Rip-O-Matics, and this was the one I'm the most proud of.
Yeah. Can you go into that, the idea of that a little bit more for some other people who have no idea what you're talking about?
Yeah. So basically, when you're pitching a movie, you don't have the movie to, like, you don't have visuals from the movie. That's the whole point, is you want to get somebody to go give you some money to make a movie. So as part of the pitch process, a lot of directors cut together what I call a Rip-O-Matic. There's a couple different terms for it, but Rip-O-Matic is the one that
one's the most fun.
With. And and so you go, and they're usually like, you're basically cutting a trailer for a movie that doesn't exist yet, using other movies as your sources. So I did one Rip-O-Matic for a friend that was like, it was like a detective story, set in the like Pacific Northwest. So we used like some of the gray and a little bit of like Insomnia and a little bit of like Silence of the Lambs. And you find pieces of dialogue and shots that have the tone and the vibe and the if you get lucky, the content that you need, and then you cut those together like a trailer. And then you bring that, when you go into a pitch meeting, you've got your lookbook, which is, just like art and concept drawings and things like that, and discussions about story and character. And then you've got this like little sizzle reel trailer piece that you can show to get people excited.
Right. This is like pre-production, it's just the ideas,
It's almost like mood boarding.
Yeah, exactly. In in Baby Driver's case, we called it a mood reel, and we went through every sort of change in tone and emotion throughout the film in each of the sequences, using the tracks that Edgar had written into the script. So you could go through and there's like a heist. There were a couple different heist sections. There was falling in love section. There was the like consequences section, So we spent a while doing that. That was by far the most involved Rip-O-Matic I've ever worked on.
Yeah, well, when you think about it, that is a hard idea to convey. I mean, people said this too about the trailer that they did wind up releasing for Baby Driver. A lot of people were saying it didn't even really capture the essence of the movie because they ditched the whole music idea. Like that didn't really come through enough in the trailer of how much of a prominent aspect that was going to be.
It's an action musical.
Right. Which I think, some people were saying was one of the reasons why they decided then to release that whole first scene to like YouTube for free, is because, we really need to, this is why you need to watch the movie. And people saw that and were like, oh my God.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's fantastic.
It's a unique film and a unique concept, and obviously Edgar's amazing. And so then when they did get the green light, then he had like 3 or 4 different storyboard artists working all at the same time on different sequences, including dialogue scenes, which is not normally like a thing that you would storyboard.
Right.
And so he would shuttle those my way, and I would start essentially trying to time out how all these scenes might play in real time to these songs, because all the other departments in the movie had to get an idea of what the like, not only what the tone of the scene would be, but like how to fill that time. So particularly for like the cinematographer, it's like you've normally with the storyboards, you're cutting things together and you sort of make it work for the storyboard, and make sure that everybody can see each frame and understand what the action is, but you're not actually trying to hit like a time normally. And, with Baby Driver, you're obviously like, we're not cutting the song. So, if there's a dialogue scene and I've got 8 storyboards for a 2-minute song, like I'm hanging a long time on each storyboard. And, but then through the process of cutting those together, I would send some notes back to Edgar and be like, I had a hard time getting from, storyboard 30 to storyboard 50, in like 5 seconds, which is where you wanted these 2 words to be in the song. But then I have way too much time between, 50 and 55, for the next like minute of track. And so that helps Edgar then go back and be like, okay, is that a problem? Do I, or do I need to rewrite something? Do I need to think about how to stage it? There's a couple instances where, where in the movie they restart the song, and that was because they actually ran out of song for the action. And so they're like, they sort of made that up on the fly, like, oh shoot, like this sequence is going to run longer, and with Paul there on set, they knew that. So they're like, okay, let's have him, let's have him start the song over again for some reason.
Make it happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of intricate pieces that go into that, something like of that magnitude. If we have a sec here, we actually have a question from the audience. CJ in the chat asks, how does an editor end up working on a specific, like a bigger film like John Wick, is it like any other job that you apply to? Or do you apply to a production company and then they put you on a certain movie, et cetera, et cetera? So if you could go in a little into that, that'd be great.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of questions there. One is I'm freelance. When I'm working on a movie, I'm employed by the production company, and then when I'm done, I'm unemployed, like I am right now. And in terms of like what I apply to, there's a couple different ways that can happen. I have an agent now, so I'm represented at UTA, and they have their network, so they have a better idea of what movies are starting to look for editors, and they'll put me up. They're constantly in contact with producers and post supervisors and post executives at the different studios. So we'll have a chat, like now. And talk to my agents, multiple times a week. And they're like, okay, these projects are coming. We think maybe you should meet these people over here. Sometimes I'll get scripts, less and less so lately. Like it used to be, I would get a script by email sort of as the first step. And now I'm not really getting scripts as much these days, which I don't know if that's like a security thing or what. Yeah, so right now I have representatives that are looking for me. Sometimes that's also my own network. Obviously, like with John Wick 2, I didn't have to go apply to John Wick 3. The director just called and was like, hey, do you want to come back?
That's great.
And, but before you have like an agent, then, it's a lot more of like, who do you know who can introduce you to somebody who can introduce you to somebody else? And so, that part gets a little tricky. The other question I get sometimes is like, how specifically do you get onto action movies? And I think that's just like, a lot of that is luck. That like for me, I just by sheer luck, I ended up as being an assistant editor on a bunch of big actiony movies and comic book movies and things like that. And so when you start interviewing, people see those titles, even though it was as an assistant editor, not as an editor, people see those titles on your resume. And they're like, oh, action. Great. Okay, great. Come work on our action movie. But, as like an editor, you're like, I've never like cut an action movie before. I've just like, exported them. And
ProRes.
Yeah. I mean, it's like slightly more complicated than that, but that's a basic idea.
Oh, man.
But so in a way, I feel like I kind of lucked in. Like I love being in the action, world. I love that most of the things that I get offered are action. I wouldn't mind doing something else along the way, but like action's good. So sometimes I feel like I just sort of like ended up here by chance.
Do you feel like with all of your past experience with being an assistant, and also with your experience of like with John Wick and then even Revolt and Proud Mary, do you find yourself developing your own style of editing action, or does it all depend on what you're given?
It depends mostly on what you're given. I mean, your own sense of timing and what you think is funny are definitely things that that I personally bring to it, but it's not like a conscious choice. And mostly I view my job as like, how do I best understand what the director wants and give that to them? So like on the Wick movies, it just happens to be that like Chad's sensibility and my sensibility overlap a lot. So like, we both like sort of more classically cut sequences, staying wide, staying long, starting with like generally, Chad in particular likes to like start wide and move closer and move back out, and I don't think about that a lot when I'm cutting. I mostly look at the dailies for the scene and figure out what I feel like is the most interesting way to approach it. But then like on Bullet Train, going to work for Dave Leitch, he is and that movie in particular is like there's more of like a comedy slant, and obviously Dave comes from like Deadpool 2 and Hobbs and Shaw, and that's a totally different style than John Wick. So it's, it sort of becomes my job to like learn what Dave's style is and what he likes, and, and do that for him. And sort of, it doesn't really matter whether or not it's my style. And the challenge of making all that work and like figuring out what a new director wants and being able to like give it to them on the first try. That's a fun challenge to be like, okay, how do I completely throw out everything that I was doing for Chad and start taking in everything that I need to do for Dave.
That's interesting because when you got the call for John Wick 2, you're starting at it's the second movie in the series, so there already was a John Wick 1. Did you happen to already have seen John Wick 1 before you got the call?
Yeah.
Did you feel any pressure of like having to like not mimic what they were doing in the first one, but like scramble to try to match that in any way? Or was it solely just bringing your own taste and flavor to it rather than trying to yeah.
I mean, I think I viewed it as a benefit that like John Wick 1 had already gone through the like challenge of figuring out what is the tone of this, world. What is the editorial style? What works best? I mean, there's tons of interviews where you can find Chad and Elizabeth and Dave, talking about, how they had originally cut a much more like serious version of John Wick 1, but their preview scores weren't great. And the more that the weirder they made it, when they went back into all the different actors' takes and they like picked out like Michael Nyqvist's like weirdest reads, that made all the difference. And all of a sudden audiences were into it a lot more. So
Interesting.
So it makes my job actually a little bit easier because then I'm like, okay, like we're gonna like this might seem like a weird, acting choice, but that's good for us. So I'm gonna go with it. I mean, I'm sure that I brought I couldn't point to like a specific like sensibility that I brought to like John Wick 2 and 3. I know what I think my skills, or what I think like my particular, aspects of editing that I'm good at are, and, and some of those I know I got to exercise in the Wick franchise. But like, I was mostly like grateful for the style, for like coming into a style, and because that saves us a lot of time. Like in Wick 2 when we're cutting together like a little bit of a Helen montage as John is going through his house and looking at the card and and realize and sort of he's like back home in this empty house again with his dog, like that. This style that is us, like the style of that little section is us intentionally going back to Elizabeth's style from John Wick 1 and how she very, had just like quick flashes of things in the beginning of John Wick 1.
Right.
Speaking of choices, we were very interested to know, like, because the way when we shoot our action stuff, it's very much like a puzzle piece of like, we pull a lot of inspiration from John Wick and from like the Raid movies where everything is kind of shot a very particular way and there's really not a lot of choices. Because we're not shooting necessarily coverage of stuff. So from an editing standpoint, when you're putting together a John Wick action scene, like what are the choices like?
I mean, when you're putting together a John Wick action scene, there aren't actually all that many choices. They've worked everything out in advance. Even the things that they figure out on the day, because they basically they set up a rehearsal space, and they put cardboard boxes in roughly the shape of like what the set will be like. But then when they actually get to the set, sometimes it's a little bit different, and or they'll see an opportunity to do something cool, on the set once they're actually there on the day, and they'll change things around. But like Chad is, he's the best at what he does for action. So the footage that I get is just like it fits together perfectly most of the time. There aren't a lot of choices. It's usually very clear. They might shoot multiple cameras, or get the same piece of action from multiple sides, but it's usually clear what is the clearest angle on the action. And that's generally what I will go for, is, where can I see the martial arts the best? Where can I see the sword fight the best? And then I'll hold that as long as I can until something breaks, there's a flub, or you just hit the natural end of the little chunk that they shot, or I can't see something, somebody's doing something that I need to see better than I can see in this angle, and then I'll cut.
Yeah, this is something Mike and I have been talking about for a while. As we start to do more and more of our own action-based scenes and whatnot, really paying attention to what other people are doing, specifically the team from John Wick, and and now I mean, Mike always, you know, now is so really emphasizes that pre-production aspect of figuring everything out ahead of time and making it so there are less choices that you have to make, like, you know, shooting for the edit in a certain way like that. And Mike, you actually just told me the other day about how, I know you follow the stunt teams on Instagram and stuff, about doing the cardboard box setups and how much that helps, you know, when you're on the day, like you were saying, Evan, like really making it make sense way before it even happens. So that's something that we've tried to emulate too, and I think it's super helpful.
Yeah, I mean, like I remember on Wick 3, I went into the rehearsal space one day, and the stunt guys had like set up like one of those scissor lifts, you know, and then there was like a stack of mats, you know, like 10 feet below the like bottom of the scissor lift, or at least where where the platform had been raised up to, you know, and that was it. Everything else, you know, that was the only thing in the space. And there was a guy like practicing rolling off and like landing on the mat. And I was like, oh, that's cool. I wonder what that's for, you know. And then you see like when the Ghost Recon guys enter the Continental in Wick 3, and during the shotgun section, there's a guy that falls over a railing, you know, and then like sort of like lands on a couple different things before hitting the ground, you know. And like that's what the scissor lift was like representing, was the upper floor of this like railing, and then the guy flips over and goes down.
There you go. That's so fun that you got to see that stuff, you know, because that's all part of it, and a lot of people don't get to see that.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I like to be like on location, even if I'm not on set all the time. Is, you know, you pop in various places and you see cool things, and you go back to your office and cut dailies.
Yeah,
That's so cool.
Well, the best part is seeing the whole process unfold from the beginning to end. And the fact that you can be part of that, even just as an editor, is amazing.
So we have another question. Actually, I was going to reference this a while ago on our episode 4 or 5 or something like that. We had on our buddy Josh, who works at DreamWorks Animation, who happens to be an animatic editor. I was going to bring this up and then I forgot. But he actually asked a question, which is, having worked in live action and your previous work on animatics, would you ever consider working in a space like animation? Or have you already worked in that kind of space?
I haven't worked in animation. I would, you know, as I tell my agents, I'll consider anything. You know, like I know as an assistant editor, I worked on some shows that Marianne Brandon edited, and, you know, and so she would go from like Star Trek Into Darkness to How to Train Your Dragon, you know, back to, you know, Star Wars. And that's definitely something that I would do. I haven't specifically sought out, you know, an animation job. But yeah, I just, you know, definitely would.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, we had spoken to him because he's kind of the one that introduced me to that concept of animatic editing and what that actually entails. And then to hear you speak about it, I was like, oh wow, everyone's doing this.
Yeah, I mean, all big films, you know, have previs that, you know, somebody has to cut together. So it's just a matter of whether or not it's the previs because like the previs company has their own editor, so sometimes they do it, but, you know, sometimes you want the editor of the movie, you know, the editor that's going to cut the movie to do it.
Yeah, something too that I remember speaking to Josh about was that kind of leads me into another question I want to ask you, which was Josh had always said to me, he said, Chris, I think you'd be really good at this because part of at least his job over at DreamWorks was doing a lot of sound design in, you know, as well as doing the visual part of it, to really, you know, sell what the animatic is doing. Which, you know, may be even more applicable to animation and stuff. And I remembered reading about how or I don't know if it was part of your job or they asked you to do some aspect of sound design or sound mixing when you were working on one of your projects.
Yeah, so that was Star Trek Into Darkness.
Okay, that's what I was reading, yeah.
And they, you know, I had already been at Bad Robot for a couple of years, and the post executive there, you know, had been saying that like JJ, you know, JJ likes to be moving all the time. And the traditional workflow when you're doing a preview screening or a studio screening and you want to have a good, you know, sound mix for that is that you sort of have to lock the cut temporarily in order to give the sound crew time to do their work. Because if you're constantly changing the edit, then the sound people are constantly chasing that edit in terms of conforming. They're not actually
gonna quit.
Yeah, they're gonna murder you, and you won't have sound. But so JJ was trying to figure out a way to not have to stop editing midstream in the middle of his director's cut, or even or after that. Obviously, they would still go and do post sound with Skywalker at the end, but he wanted to not have to do that and to not have to stop editing in the middle. And so Avid released a version of Media Composer that allowed us to do surround sound in the timeline directly, and nobody had really, no big film had really done it. It was a brand new feature, and so Ben Rosenblatt, the post exec at Bad Robot, hired me and 3 other people to basically figure it out.
Right.
And
that's cool.
So there were 3 assistant editors, including myself, and then there was a sound mixer from Skywalker who came down to help us. And we did it. And I think by the time that we finished our job, if you watched Star Trek Into Darkness, it had, it sounded great. It obviously didn't sound like, when you hear the final mix that Skywalker did, obviously that's still going to be much better. But in terms of temp mixes, it sounded incredible. And I got a lot of experience there. I'd already, it's part of the job of being assistant editors to do sound work. So I had already been doing sound work for years. But I learned a lot from Will Files, who was our Skywalker, consultant. And I think all of us that got to do that for 6 months straight, learned a lot about how to temp sound in a better, and mix sound in a better, more believable way until you can bring in the pros to actually.
Yeah, I'm sure you might have picked up a lot of stuff. You said that was 6 months too.
Yeah,
that's a long time for just working on that one part of it. That's really cool.
Well, because the edit, first we have to figure it out and track everything, and while they're still going reel by reel and putting the edits together, and then they'll finish a version, and then we have to go finish a sound pass, and then they'll screen it, and then there's notes, and then then a month more of editing before the next screening, and so then another round of catching up to whatever they changed.
And I mean, it's so much content to begin with. Yeah.
Well, you got phasers and spaceships and transporters, and there's a lot.
Oh my.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, just the conference room attack that's in I say reel 2, which I guess puts it 25 minutes or whatever into the movie. That conference room attack took us forever. We went through so many versions of that. And we're all trying to I was basically the Tetris master, because we were limited to 16 mono tracks. So we had to figure out how to, place all of our clips into the timeline, that we wanted, and mix down things that were breaking that 16 track barrier. We call that the laser cat sequence, because it took us forever to figure out what the phasers from the ships that were attacking the conference room from outside should sound like, and how not to have it completely just pierce your eardrums, with this minute long attack that had glass and lasers and things like that.
Yeah, go ahead, Ray.
I was gonna say, are you creating those sounds? Or are you are you mixing them with other stock elements, or?
Yeah, so Will, for things like that, that were custom, Will would just go off into Pro Tools land and do that, and come back with a couple bounces of different elements, and then I would mix them in Media Composer.
And is that stuff, would that wind up being temp, or that's what's going in?
A little bit of mix and match. I mean, thankfully, because it's Will, and because he was working, he is a Skywalker guy, a lot of what we did, I think, made it in some form or another into the final tracks, and a lot of it got replaced, by Ben Burt and his crew. So, it was a little bit, yeah.
But at least you're establishing what it should sound like, and then they're just making a better version of it.
Yeah, we got to go through all of the revisions with JJ. So by the time that post sound started, he could go to Ben Burt and be like, all right, we tried these 5 things and none of them worked. And then we hit this 6th thing, and this 6th thing is awesome, and you can hear the temp, and what's a better version of that?
Right.
Fantastic. That's awesome. That's really cool. We have another question from the audience. This is fun. This is the most amount of questions we've ever gotten. Probably because Mike blasted it out too, because this is all our friends. Jackie Kaczynski asks, how often do you edit bad acting versus good acting? And I want to put a spin on that too. I want to say what, because I was going to go back to this before of when you're looking at takes on a technical level, when you're looking at one take over the other, how are you organizing what's good versus bad? I mean, I know that's a very black and white way to put it, but I think you get where I'm going.
Yeah. It depends on the movie. If the there's a lot of factors that go into whether or not the performances you get are good or bad, and a lot of it has to do with if the movie it has a competent directors and producers and a good casting agent or casting director behind it, then you'll get and the script is good, you'll get good performances. If the script is bad, it's not really fair to blame the actor for the performance.
Right.
It's garbage in, garbage out, right?
Yeah. For me, as I'm going through, I'm most of the ranking that I do is very just I just sort of keep it mentally, in I don't even know where, but I basically I think of watching dailies as training my brain, excuse me, to remember all these takes. And then, and so in that is okay, this one's better than that one. This one, the end of it was good. Oh, I like the way that they, read this one line in take 5, but the rest of that take I didn't like as much. There's a lot of just mental note taking, of what my preferences are. And my preferences might be wrong, or they might be right for the assembly, and then you get in and you watch the whole movie once you finish shooting, and you realize oh, this movie's actually totally different than what I was anticipating it would be, and I need to go back and I need to change a lot of it. Southside with You, I think, was a good example of we spent a lot of time looking at different takes for how should Tika Sumpter's Michelle Obama character come off, because we had a little bit of a concern that at some point she very specifically tells him, take me home, or or let me out of the car or whatever, and he's no, I'm gonna keep driving to this ice cream parlor that I'm gonna take you at, and we're well, now it just seems like he's kidnapping her. So
yeah, the context,
yeah, so we had to go, and for both of them, but we had to the challenge in that movie was how do you have conflict on a first date and then believe that these people went on to a second date and a marriage and a presidency and and are the people that we see in public life, and so that was a lot of figuring out what is can they have a difference of opinions while not while not having the whole thing fall apart, and when one of them gets angry, and so that was definitely a case where I couldn't even tell you how many takes of my original choices, are left in the final product, but we went through all of them again and again to nail that down.
That's great. Thanks for your question, Jackie.
How closely do you work with the director in the editing process? Does it vary from movie to movie?
It varies a little bit depending on how comfortable the directors are in the editing process. Chad, the way that I like to work, and thankfully the way that Chad likes to work, is he'll come in the morning, we'll watch something, or we'll talk about what sort of needs to be done, and then he'll leave for 3 hours, and I'll do my thing, and then he'll come back, and I'll go get him if I have something to show him, and sort of we do that all day back and forth. He's rarely in my office for more than 45 minutes or an hour, and I prefer that because I think that I get better work done, and I have more freedom to experiment when there isn't a pair of eyes looking over my shoulder, and even sometimes I have friends whose directors are sitting on the couch on their laptop, and they're I'm not looking at the screen, I promise, but they're looking at the screen.
Of course.
And so you're sort of you're sitting there at the keyboard being well, I want to try this thing, but I don't really want him to see it until it's done, and so how engrossed in his email is he right now?
Yeah.
And so I don't, for me, that type of working relationship, I've done it, but I don't particularly, it's not my favorite.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I'm thinking about how I would feel
I'd be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I've had backseat editors before, and it's like a little bit of a stressful thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think and maybe that's just the nature of people that are editors too. Is like I feel like I want it to be more of a black box kind of thing where it's like you're in the zone, you're doing your thing, and you spit something out, and then we all take, because it's you do there is so much experimenting, like you were saying. So yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting.
Now, Evan, has working on John Wick kind of made you bias towards action movies going forward? Because I mean, to me, and I think to a lot of other people too, John Wick kind of it kind of changed the game on action movies, and kind of like, I know for me, it's the way it's shot, the way it's performed, the way it's put together is kind of like, that's my preference of action film, and it's the highest quality tier that is out there. So does it put a pressure on you for your preceding work of like being the critically acclaimed editor of John Wick? Does that put a pressure on you?
A little bit. I like Proud Mary is a movie that I am not proud of. I took it, I sort of knew it was going to be problematic when I took it, but I took it for other reasons that, were unrelated to the movie itself, which is obviously
you got to make money.
Yeah, and I had my second kid on the way, and it was a movie that was offering to like pay my rate and not have me travel, and because I didn't want to leave LA at that point. And the timing worked out so I could finish that and go right into Wick 3. There are like a bunch of things, but as usual, it's like you take things for the wrong reasons and you end up sort of regretting it. And that was a movie where I got in and, the studio head was like, make this like John Wick. I'm like, what?
Of course.
Your actors didn't prepare like John Wick. You didn't shoot the action like John Wick. You didn't do the Keanu starts working out for a Wick movie like 6 months in advance. It's like you can't have an actor come in 3 weeks out, do an hour of like cardio every day and then, and learn a bit of choreography and expect me to be able to like suddenly turn that into an action scene that's worthy of, being compared to John Wick. So yeah, I mean, it makes me a little bit more reticent to take movies where I feel like they aren't putting that level of thought and prep into it. The good thing is that like now we've set the bar. So I think that like if I'm working on a big studio movie these days, they're going to be like, okay, like there's a good chance that they're just even going to Chad's company and being like, okay, we want good action in this movie. What do we need to do? And then Chad is telling them like, okay, I'm going to set you up with a stunt coordinator and I'm going to set you up with, a trainer. And you have to guarantee that we've got 8 weeks of so-and-so's time, every day for like 4 hours a day or whatever, and we will make sure that you end up with a good action scene. But yeah, it's tricky. It's as you said before, shit in, shit out. So like, there was a part of like Proud Mary where it's like, how come this doesn't feel like John Wick? And it's like, well, because like you might have hired me, but you didn't copy any of the other things, that you needed to copy.
It's so interesting you say that, because even on our last episode, I went.
You're gonna say that.
I went on a little rant about the TV show The Equalizer, which is a new show with Queen Latifah, and it's nothing against Queen Latifah, but it became very apparent in the first action sequence where it felt like the Taken 3 fence jumping scene, where it takes 17 takes to jump a fence. But I mean, how does that over editing of action sequences, how does that happen? I know it's not necessarily the editor's fault, but I mean, like,
yeah, the Taken thing, I have no idea how that happens. I assume that it's a stunt guy hopping over that fence and not Liam Neeson. So that's why you only see him really from his back. Most like cutting good action is not hard if the material is good. So most bad action that seems over edited is because you're trying to fix something, and you're just doing the best that you can.
In those situations, it can be blatant,
Yeah. It's like, and there is a little bit of a tendency if you're like, I think on the like producing side of things, to be like, okay, once everybody acknowledges the action sucks, then like, well, there's this idea that like, if you make it choppy and you just make it feel frenetic, that'll make up for something, and it'll just pass by quickly, and people will be like, oh, something fast happened. Then
put more camera shake in post.
Yeah,
put more camera shake.
I was literally about to say, like, we've had comments on our films where people like hate the camera shake, and we're like just trying to add a little more energy to the shots. But yeah, I mean, you guys deal with a lot of back and forth on that.
I mean, those are the tricks that that people use. Sometimes you're forced into that corner,
Yeah.
So, like, your experience on Proud Mary, would you say that most of the time that stuff comes down from the top, from this, like from the producers, from the studio, and not so much from whichever director is like, it doesn't come from the director's inexperience of action. It comes from the studio not understanding the process.
It's somewhere in the middle.
Okay.
There's like, directors still have a lot of latitude in how they shoot action, and what they push for. It's like dealing with directors is a lot of like watching them figure out how they want to spend their political capital, and like sometimes that political capital is like, well, I don't want to, if I hire a new composer, even though the last composer was totally fine, I can save, X amount of money that I can redirect towards VFX shots that I want. It's like decisions like that. So sometimes it's like, for stunt, it would be, or for an action scene, it'd be like, okay, I'm having a difficult time even just getting like rehearsal time with this actor, to do dialogue scenes. So I guess maybe I won't also push for, for like physical training and, and like stunt rehearsal as much as I would like to, or you're talking with a student and be like, I need, 6 weeks of prep. And they're like, we don't have that in the budget. We've got 2 weeks of prep. And you're like, okay, well, how about 3.5 weeks of prep? There's like a lot of like things like that where it's just, you're like horse trading and where the actual, where the blame lies, is sort of in this like nebulous gray area.
Well, without saying names of movies or people, was there ever a time where your edit actually salvaged the movie on a broken project that wasn't going to work?
Yes.
That's it.
That's it. Just yes.
You said no names and no people, so
yeah.
Yes.
It's a good point, Mike.
I did say that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess everyone kind of has to do that at some point. Get put in those situations sometimes.
Yeah. Those situations are they're sad, sometimes if you're like, I have both been replaced and been the guy coming in to replace other people. And, it's never a fun experience. But hopefully, if you come out of it with a good movie, then a lot of the a lot of the pain is forgiven or forgotten.
Cool. I actually have something I forgot to touch on before, that we could get into real quick, which is when we were talking about like Baby Driver and that stuff and doing editing on site, talking more about that was kind of the first time I had ever heard of like, oh, having the editor there cutting the scene, and talking about the future of like editing and stuff. I know I had seen some things about you developing certain automation processes for specifically Avid and working on scripts and whatnot. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that, and then kind of where you see, future improvements in software and maybe what you'd like to see in the future.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's where my IT background of, doing tech support at San Winston really came in handy.
Okay. Yeah.
While I was there, I put some databases together and figured out some like Visual Basic scripting, and then ended up creating like an internal project tracking thing for them with PHP. And so when I got into assistant editing, there were opportunities to automate things using skills that I had and scripting languages that I knew. The thing that I would say that I guess I'm like most known for is really just a simple like text converter tool. The version on my website is a little, was prettied up and has a nice user interface, and that took a little while. But the actual code to do the conversion from one text file to another, was like half a day. And the idea, the like idea for the workflow came from our visual effects editor on Mission Impossible for George McCarthy. And so that was a situation where like I saw him doing, he had a really fancy database and a way to like, to get material out of Avid and into his database, through this method, but it seemed overly complicated. Like I was like looking at him doing it, being like, I can make that faster,
Right.
And so,
and this is all organizational.
This is mostly organizational. Yeah, it doesn't have to do like this on the assistant editing front. It's a lot of like, labeling and
tagging,
finding media files or like syncing to Avid systems that are not in the same location together. There are things that like basically problems that I encountered as an assistant editor and figured out how to solve in a way that would, that was like usable by general, by just a normal assistant editor who didn't have tech skills and scripting skills and things like that. I haven't released all that much of it lately because, once I started editing, I started running into those problems less. I had my own editorial problems, but I was no longer on the assistant side being like, oh, this thing seems very manual. How do I make it less manual? And one of the things about Avid Media Composer, as much as I love it, it is not very open for scripting, and things that like when I was cutting indies in Final Cut Pro 7, like I could go and, I could insert subtitles, at specific points in the timeline with the right font and color and positioning and everything just by editing the XML file, in an automated way. And I can't do that, with Avid. So then you have to sort of do these workarounds of like, what can you get out of Avid? What can you do with it? And then how do you bring that back into an Avid?
Is there anything that you're begging Avid to make happen? Because I know a lot of times this comes up on the Adobe front because we're all, Adobe Creative Cloud users. And there are certain things that the community is just like, please put this in the program. So is there anything you find yourself wanting?
There's tons of things. I'm part of the beta group at, for that runs, Media Composer pre-release versions. And so there's a whole forum there, for feature requests. There's tons of things, like scripting, opening it up to, for scripting or having sequences represented by text files and not binary files is, something that is definitely, high on my list. Some of the other things they're tackling, they're aware of most of this stuff. It's just a matter of, again, resource allocation and how do you want to dedicate your programmer's time?
Yeah. I was just curious.
But yeah, I know a few guys at Avid. I'm in the forum, so there's definitely, if I hit something that's like, oh my God, like, why don't you have this? I might shoot an email off to them.
That's great. We have one more question from CJ again. He was hearing us talk about, taking things that are crap and trying to make them good. And he said, does it ever happen the opposite way, where maybe something is shot really well, but edited super poorly? I think we kind of touched on that already, where you say, unfortunately, sometimes editors have to be replaced, and that kind of happens. So maybe we touched on that a little bit already.
Yeah, I mean, I've come into situations where I feel like the material is there, but I can't figure out why something is cut the way that it is. It could, because it's obviously like you could make a better sequence out of it. Sometimes you come in and you realize that like the material is not fantastic, but you can make something out of it. But through the process of like trying a bunch of things to make something that is only good, great, you've ended up at a worse place, so like it's that when you're like coming into to like take a movie over, or replace somebody, you have to figure out, do I want to stick with the sequence that they've cut already and make it better, or do I want to start from scratch? And so sometimes it's like, like I recut an action scene that was like pretty good overall. There were just, it just needed it needed refinements. It needed a lot of like little refinements, but like the take choices were fine. The like general idea of the cut was fine. It just needed a little like nip and tuck, and then there's other things where like you come in and be like, I can't rescue this as is. I just need to start over and see what my own choice, where my own choices lead me.
Cool. Well, damn guys, we've talked about, so I'm sitting here like, scratching off my bullets. I'm like, scratch it off, man. This has been so much fun.
One thing I have a question is,
sure,
a little bit more about the VFX editing process. Like, what is the workflow there? Do you lay out like, all your dailies and get an approved lot cut, then send it out, and then you replace things in? Certain times there's like scenes where you might have invisible cuts and the VFX hides that up. What's the process like when you edit for VFX?
So usually, like as I'm going through, if I need like if I need like a morph or I need a split screen, I'll do all that myself. And then, we don't really act on anything until after you finish shooting and you've had a chance to like watch it through and see, which decisions you made about shots that you need hold up and which ones don't. And then, I think it's sort of like it's a way to prove that you need the work that you thought you needed. And, once you've proved like, yes, this is what I need, then it becomes a little bit of like looking at the schedule, because nobody wants to pay for a shot that you're going to cut out. So you sort of want to, like, if it's something simple like a split screen, that'll happen at the very last minute. Like, we'll turn those over, a month or so before before we actually need them, and somebody will just bang it out in their garage and send it back. For the bigger things like, 3D effects or, huge set extensions or things that require like, lots of, digital assets that need to be created, then you sort of have to commit to that early and hope that, in 4 months or whatever, that you haven't made a bad decision that costs a lot of money to fix. So yeah, it's mostly like looking at your cut and trying to like figure out when you need to like absolutely commit to something. And if you don't need to absolutely commit to it, then even if you're pretty sure of it, you just still sort of wait until that moment where you're like, okay, now it's time to do split screens and easier things like that.
I'm curious what this kind of applies to everyone. Though I kind of know like Ryan's situation and Mike's, but speaking of technology and even within like workspaces themselves, I recently moved to an ultrawide monitor for kind of specifically for working on sequences, and I think it's helped me a decent amount, just being able to lay out more right in front of me. But even before this, it was funny. We used to joke in college. I kind of had like a triple monitor setup with 1, 2, and 3 up top. Mm-hmm. We used to call it NASA. Mm-hmm. I used to say I work at NASA. I've always kind of just like, I like a lot of desktop room. So Evan, is that something that you have worked on or considered making your preference?
Yeah, I'd like to try one of the like ultra wides. At home, I just have a couple 24-inch monitors. On Birds of Prey, I had these like huge dual 30-inch monitors, which I didn't like at first, and then I got used to them, because the actual like fonts in them are tiny, so they take a little bit of like customization, but then having all that space for a timeline and a viewer and all my open bins and everything, that was really nice. I don't have
that's what I've been able to have is like bins up top, and like it's great. Yeah. I know, Mike, you just moved to an ultrawide monitor too.
Yeah, I love it.
A little bit ago.
But yeah, just being able to see the timeline, have it be so long. I can see everything.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Right? It's so attractive. Yeah. Just you're not doing as much work, and you're able to see more contextual information of like where stuff is.
Yeah, I ordered one of these like prefabricated backyard office sheds that's going to come in a couple weeks. We moved into this house, in the middle of the pandemic, and right now my Avid's in my in the same room that my kids watch TV in, and my wife does her work in. So I need to get that out of there. And so I'm thinking that once that office is set up, like I might go to the ultra wide. I might sort of reassess what all my kit currently is.
Yeah,
and
sure,
try an ultra wide.
That was my other question, was about the pandemic, and were you already working in your own space that you just kind of you went right into it, or you had to sort of figure things out to come up with a space at home?
So I picked up a job actually the week that LA went into lockdown, And I'd had an office. We were living in an apartment, and I'd had like my own room in that apartment that I'd been using as my office since we moved in there. So that was already all set up, and it had fiber, which was great, And then like 2 months later, we moved into this house, and I lost my access to fiber, and I just had some, crappy AT&T. So that was like actually the biggest disappointment, was like going 1 week from having, a gig up and down and being able to like do turnovers and download dailies and everything, as quickly as possible. And then, coming here and all of a sudden, I'm back in like where I was like 10 years ago, in terms of internet speed. But, I'd say there was more, because the office, like that office in my apartment is where I did all the Baby Driver stuff. Like that was already up and running. And it was just a matter of like, okay, now I'm doing a home project versus going to, a post facility somewhere and cutting a movie. And then setting up the office here, that was much more of like, okay, what corner can I stick this desk into? Like, we ended up ditching we had a 62-inch plasma or something like that. That I was like, it was 80 pounds mounted to the wall of the apartment. I was like, I'm not moving that. I'm just leaving that for the next people. And so, we're like, now we're at this like 30, we're looking at like a 32-inch, Sony TV that's still, a decade old. We're just basically waiting. Like everything's waiting on the office. Once the office comes and I get to like make a new office, then everything else, then we'll like figure out, how to like make a proper TV room and playroom and, for my kids and get my wife's her own office space somewhere too. So we're not all, sitting on top of each other.
Yeah. I think a majority of like, at least our group of friends, like that we all, produce videos and we work, at least me and Chris, all three of us, we go to an office typically and work on a desk setup, but we all have our own desk setups at home because it's also a hobby to just make stuff and have like a designer's space to go. So when the pandemic happened, like we all kind of lucked out. We're like, oh, we already have like a perfect workspace to just continue working. And I'm still remote. A year this week was working remote. I'm still remote.
Yeah, same here.
Yeah. I mean, the biggest change I'd say on my side is that most of the time I'm not allowed to take media home.
Okay.
So I have to go into an office because that's the only place I'm allowed to access the movie. And for years, like editors, like I know plenty of other feature editors that have their own home office setup, and that rivals or is better than what you get when a studio rents you one in an office somewhere. And for years we've been like, oh, I'd love to like be able to just like work from home, because then that makes your schedule easier and you can choose when you want to deal with LA traffic. And, and the studios, have generally, up until the pandemic, it was like, no, it's not secure. Your home is not, we've put in all this money to be MPAA certified and et cetera, et cetera. And now it's like the pandemic hit, and within like 2 weeks, it was like, here's a hard drive of all the the media for the movie, go ahead, take it home, just make sure it's encrypted and it should be fine, and like all of a sudden, people figured it out. I mean, obviously like the Marvels of the world are doing more like remote systems where you don't have to have your whole setup at home. You're really just sort of remoting into a system that's on Disney.
That's what Josh is doing at DreamWorks. He works off his laptop, but he remotes in through like a secure VPN, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Bullet Train, we went the local media route because one of the downsides of the remote version is you can't get a client monitor most of the time. And I really rely on the client monitor for, having the best picture quality and for picture and audio sync. So yeah, Sony was cool with us having encrypted drives at home, and so we went that route. But
kind of system are you running? Like a really beefy like Windows box, or like
the laptop I'm talking to you now on, actually.
Oh really? You did it off a laptop?
Yeah, I just dock it. I have a 16-inch MacBook Pro. I dock it into a CalDigit Thunderbolt dock with to get my monitors and Ethernet and everything. And I just use that because my needs are technically not very intense. I cut with a lot of footage, but it's like highly compressed. I'm not doing I'm barely even cutting 4K. Like most of the time I'm still in 1080p. So, the laptop handles it just fine.
Yeah. I mean, I'm working off of 15-inch MacBook Pro for motion design, Premiere, editing, sound, like everything. And I'm still, it has some hiccups, but it does the job.
Yeah. I like the laptop because, I put everything on it. And then when I go to work, I just, undock it, throw it in my backpack, and I've got everything with me. So like I'm always prepared. If I need to like open Avid somewhere, I can always just, do it on my laptop.
Right.
Evan, is there any kind of either franchise or kind of movie that you wish you hope you get the opportunity to work on, or a movie that you wish you got to edit?
I mean, you know, I wish that I could have helped Paul out on Baby Driver. That was a bummer.
We all do. We all do.
Yeah. You know, I went to college with John Chu, and you know, I would love to. I'd love to work with John someday. John has an editor now, in Myron Kirstein, who's great. You know, but there's I'd love to work with John someday. You know, because it's mostly like I like being in this industry when you get to work with your friends.
Yeah,
you know?
Sure.
And so, like, counting John as like as a friend and as an amazing director, you know, it would be a great experience. I don't know, I'm trying to think of what other. There's like there's editors whose careers, you know, I have a little, you know, envy of, who's like, oh, I like that path seems so cool. You know, like Joe Walker is a guy who I think gets to cut like a variety of really cool stuff. You know, and I'm in pretty frequent contact with Eddie Hamilton, who's doing the Mission Impossible movies right now, you know, and one of my favorite movies, the first Kingsman, you know, Eddie did that too. I love that movie. So,
pretty solid. Yeah.
Yeah. But, you know, I also like, everybody, when I get asked for advice on like, how do you get into feature editing, you know, how do you get an editing period or whatever from college students, you know, I often just, you know, you have to sort of give the response that like everybody takes their own path. So, you know, yeah, as much as I'd like to
do the dirty work at the beginning too. You can't just jump right into it, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. So like, right. As much as like, you know, either Eddie or Joe Walker or Tom Cross or something like that, you know, then it's like, you know, I'm on the path that I'm on, and I'm going to, you know, if I want to see changes to what the types of projects that I'm working on, then, you know, right, I got to do the work to make that happen.
All of us, we work kind of as professional editors and video producers, but on the smaller scale, doing a combination of corporate work, but also like I do media and entertainment through a PR agency, and then obviously the variety of things we do on our own. And something that I've always thought is like, oh, if I ever do want to go into the more traditional industry, like what would be my path, given that I have experience like doing it, just different experience? You know, would I have to start at the bottom, or can I just jump into like, you know, maybe like an assistant editor, an editor role, or even like, you know, a motion designer, VFX, like whatever it is. So I'm wondering like how the industry is structured to kind of mold to newer creators or artists or editors that have experience like that, but want to kind of transition.
Yeah, it comes down to like a lot of that comes down to like a trust thing, you know, and you'll find it even with like, you know, people who've been working in reality who obviously, you know how to do turnovers and know how to cut and know how to like handle high volumes of footage. You know, when they try to make it over into scripted, it's just you've got to like get people to trust, you know, that you can do all the things that you know can do.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, generally it means that like, you know, if you're editing reality and you want to make it over into scripted, you generally have to like take a step back and, you know, take an assistant job, you know, so that you can like point to some credits on your resume and be like, see, look, you know, these things that are obviously shared skills across no matter what you're cutting and no matter what you're working on, you know, I can do them, you know, in a feature just as well as I can do them somewhere else. But, you know, it's when there's definitely some like resume bias, you know, when you're interviewing.
Is this your dream job, Evan?
I think so. I like it a lot. So I think so.
Because what?
Simple question, simple answer.
Yeah. I'm just always curious of like, you know, if you feel like you've made it, at what point do you feel like you're satisfied with how far you've come?
I don't feel like you ever feel like you've made it. I mean, I'll say that I'll revise that, I guess. Obviously, like at this point, I feel like I have made it into the level of like studio feature editors where, you know, I can submit my name for something and not be immediately thrown out, you know, as like too inexperienced, or we don't know who that guy is. You know, I have a body of work I can point to, but like, I think that one of the things that makes, you know, good creatives that good at what they do is that like feeling of like, there's always something more I can be striving for. And if you get to the point where you're not striving for anything, to try something new or to learn something new, then probably the work that you're doing is suffering as a result. So yeah, I mean, obviously,
Well, it's
like
being stagnant, right? It's like,
yeah, it's like you don't want to be stagnant. You don't want to be jaded. You don't want to be like, this is what I want to do. I'm here. I can do this in my sleep, and because like then people don't really like working with you. It's like you want to be. I feel like everybody. This is an industry that's based on people having dreams, and if you at some point be like, I achieved my dream, I'm done. Like people like it's like a weird thing to
boring.
say. It's a weird feeling. Yeah, people will be like, oh, you don't want to. There's like literally nothing else you want to do.
Yeah.
No, I'm good.
Yeah.
Well, I think once you hit a point in your career and obviously your personal life with your family, everything, your priorities shift, and like us all being 20 something and Mike's 30, but
don't tell anyone.
Yeah, but our priorities are like focusing on our work and our creative passions and like what's next. But when you're somewhere further in your career, you're like, all right, I'm happy doing this thing. I'm not like pushing harder and harder to. I don't know if you feel that way, but.
I think there is a little bit of like, I was like looking at people during the pandemic, right, working on their novels and writing their screenplays and, and and I like had ideas for things that I wanted to do and no time to do any of it, because I've got 2 kids that require my attention, already more than I have time to give them if I have a job and working. So your priorities do shift, but then it just becomes a balance of like, how do I be home for dinner and bedtime, while also making sure that I'm, creatively fulfilling my own, dreams, and how do I make the time, to work on all that stuff. So like, I've got things, there's like a project, there's a novel that I'm adapting and, I'm writing a script for, and, the progress happens in bits and pieces, but it happens and it keeps me engaged and
it's like a hobby, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And it's, and hopefully it turns into something down the line, but it's definitely like when I think about like, okay, what's the next step that I might want to take, be like, okay, well, why don't I see if I can produce something, or direct something, and we'll see. But in the meantime, I'm, I love editing and I love furthering my editing career. So
yeah, I was going to ask, after all these years, is editing still your passion, or do you have other passions outside of editing, or that are fueled kind of all in the same, like encompassed into the same bubble?
Yeah, I've consider editing, it's like any sort of hobby. Editing is the hobby I get paid to do. But like, as I said, I like programming. I find that programming exercises a lot of the same muscles as editing. You're like, you've got a problem, you can solve it a million different ways, but some ways are more efficient than others. So like, if I don't have footage to cut, you can find me programming. If I play piano, we like to go skiing, it's like, there's definitely things that, I think it's useful to get out from, my computer and, experience the world and travel and things like that. I mean, not these days we're not traveling, but, I think that like one of the things I've been lucky about is that a lot of the projects that I had early in my career involved some really cool travel. And so I got to combine, that interest, with my job and get paid for it. So.
Yeah, man. Everyone's gonna be traveling when eventually, right?
I miss my business trips. It's a tough one, but
I miss them. I miss them too.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Well, we're kind of winding down here. I think.
I've had a lot of water, so I'm.
Yeah. I have maybe one thing that I want to leave off on. We kind of touched on that already. Yeah, you know what I wanted. I just had this conversation with somebody of, I think it was my parents actually, which is they said to me, doesn't watching movies now does that take away from it for you, like knowing all the back end stuff? But for me, it always improves it, and what makes it really special, which is there are still some films that completely suck you in where you forget all about that. For me, examples like that are something like Interstellar, something where like all of it fades away and the magic is still there. So do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, most of the time I'm engaged in movies much more than I'm thinking about, my background knowledge of them. For me, it's a problem. Like, people ask me, like, do you think about the editing? And I'm like, if I'm thinking about the editing, there's a problem with the movie.
Then it's poorly edited.
Yeah. Right. you know, and I mean, generally it's like, yeah, if it's a well-made movie, you're going to be engrossed and not like your mind shouldn't be wandering to any professional thing. You know, it's like, that's what, for me, that's what second viewings are for. If I'm curious about like how they did something, or if I want to like examine the story structure better, or like revisit, like then that'll be like a second viewing, you know, mental state. But a first viewing mental state is just like, let me just soak it in, you know?
Absolutely. I love it.
Cool.
Guys, I think I'm out of stuff. And I know you've talked a lot, so I don't want to make you go on and on and on, but boy, we had some good conversation there. So I think let's check in with the audience. Everyone says great job, fantastic. I think we did it, guys.
Yes.
Amazing. Well, I got to say thank you again, Evan, man. It was such a pleasure to get to meet you and find out a little bit about what you do and talk to all us novice filmmakers out here in New Jersey,
Future
not knowing where we're going next. Yeah. But yeah, man, really appreciate it. So thank you everyone for joining us on the live stream, and we'll catch you next time on Until You Make It. And cheers. Go movies.